6G will happen, but the way it happens is going to look very different than the prior Gs. And what I mean by that is 6G, at least the way that it's being, the current thinking in the industry is that it's going to be an overlay of 5G, and it's going to bring new features and capabilities to the 5G platform.
Welcome to TBR Talks, decoding strategies and ecosystems of the globe's top tech firms, where we talk business model disruption in the broad technology ecosystem, from management consultancies to systems integrators, hyperscalers to independent software vendors, telecom operators to network and infrastructure vendors, and chip manufacturers to value-added resellers. We'll be answering some of the key intelligence questions we've heard from executives and business unit leaders among the leading professional IT services and telecom vendors. I'm Patrick Heffernan, Principal Analyst, and today we'll be talking about 5G and 6G with Chris Antlitz, Principal Analyst for TBR's telecom practice. All right, thanks, Chris, for coming in. Great to see you. And I know we're going to talk about telecom and 6G and even 5G, but maybe we could start with the event that you attended recently in Brooklyn.
Yeah, so I went to the 6G Summit, which is hosted by Nokia and the NYU Tandon School of Engineering. And basically, they bring together the ecosystem of the private sector, the public sector, and academia into this maybe melting pot, if you will, where all these minds come together and they're talking about what's coming down the technology innovation pipeline, and what might the commercialization of the technology look like, what are the different stakeholders looking to get out of the technology. And it's like an ecosystem event that is, they bring some very high caliber people to that event. It's a relatively small event, but they bring very high caliber people to that.
Yeah, and it's a couple days, right?
Yeah.
I read the report on it, and you just mentioned said commercialization. The thing that jumped out at me with respect to 6G was sort of between sort of the monetization, the need for investment, the government incentives. It seems like there are so many challenges around 6G, and I understand it's not even real yet, but when you think about how it's going to be real, how is it going to overcome that, the need for monetization, the need for further investment, and getting incentives right?
Yeah, so 6G will happen, but the way it happens is going to look very different than the prior Gs. And what I mean by that is 6G, at least the way that it's being, the current thinking in the industry is that it's going to be an overlay of 5G, and it's going to bring new features and capabilities to the 5G platform. It'll introduce new spectrum bands, more capacity, potentially, address some of the challenges that we've seen with 5G. So like around spectral efficiency, energy management, sustainability of networks, 6G is going to fill some of those gaps in. But where the big question mark still is how are we going to make money from this technology?
Right.
The ROI is not there, and we haven't seen it yet for 5G either. The only ROI positive use case for 5G is fixed wireless access, which is not really that revolutionary. All it is basically wireless fiber. So instead of running a cable, you're running wireless internet into a premise.
Right.
And it's great, and it's making billions of dollars for certain telcos, and it has a very rosy market opportunity, but it is not enough to justify the hundreds of billions of dollars in CapEx and spectrum that's been purchased by telcos. And 6G is coming down the pike, and the telcos can't even get 5G right. And they still, not even the technology side, they can't get that right. Yeah. And then now you introduce the actual justification to invest in the technology in the first place, and the whole conversation breaks down.
Yeah.
The telcos were under pressure to deploy 5G, and I'm going to come back to 6G in a minute. Under pressure to deploy 5G, some of the governments pushed them. You have geopolitics and some actors that have pushed very hard for this technology, and that pushes other people to also do the same thing. So you have this kind of this arms race of technology, if you will, that's developed for 5G, and 6G is going to be basically that on steroids. And we see it coming. And that's actually the piece that I wrote about the event. I bring it all back to the public sector, because I think that's where a lot of this funding is going to have to come from to make 6G a reality.
Right. But let's, I'm glad you said we'll come back to 6G. We will. Let's stick with 5G for a minute. It's 5 years old now. When you think about the expectations you had around 5G 5 years ago, and even maybe 2 years ago, how did you think we're going to be in the place where we are now, where, as you mentioned, a massive amount of CapEx spent by the telecom providers to build out all the infrastructure and the necessary capabilities, and yet not seeing that return on the investment? Is that what you anticipated 5 years ago, or is that sort of a surprise that it went in that direction?
No, we're not surprised at all. And actually, we've been talking about this since the inception, since pre-5G, essentially, when people were looking at 5G coming down the pike. And the reason we were so adamant about that point is because of what happened with 4G. Now, 4G did bring a lot of value to the global economy. The problem is that the value did not accrue to the telcos. It accrued to other players like the Netflixes of the world and
Right.
the Ubers and the Googles of the world. It did not go to the telcos. So the telcos spent all the money and dealt with the technology stack, and then other players came in and capitalized on the value. The telcos did get some value out of it in terms of cost per bit reduction. So they were able to run their networks much more efficiently,
Right.
and they were able to support much higher data load on those networks. But from a revenue standpoint, they really didn't realize that revenue. And again, we're seeing the same thing with 5G, with a small caveat for fixed wireless access.
Right.
And 6G, we don't see really, we don't see anything as of right now.
Right. So let's go back to 6G then. So I know in your piece you wrote, though, that 6G is going to leverage a mix of spectrum tranches. So in my mind, that brings up just a massive number of complications, but I'm curious mostly about the business implication of using a mix of different tranches. Does that change the way that some of the CSPs or others look at the opportunity in 6G, or does that just make it's just part of doing business and that's what's going to happen?
Yeah, so the spectrum is just a cost of doing business. You need those frequencies to run your networks and to have capacity and coverage. There's spectrum is a finite resource, and there is pressure on industry participants to use it in the most efficient way possible. So every G brings new spectral efficiency characteristics and features and capabilities into the technology set, the standard set for these Gs. And with 6G, it's going to be the same thing. There's going to be a whole nother order of magnitude spectral efficiency that's going to be gleaned from the network. But that by, in and of itself or by itself is not enough to justify mass scale investment in the networks.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I'm curious because the energy component too, you brought up in the piece, and we've been doing a lot of looking at generative AI and the demand in energy and water rarely comes up, but water also, and how demand for the energy consumption around generative AI is ever increasing, and there, just like there's a finite amount of spectrum at the moment, there's a finite amount of energy. So at some point, do you see, either as 6G starts to come online or just as 5G continues to develop, that there's going to be some pressure on some pressure to essentially get the energy necessary to maintain the kind of network connectivity and all that we're used to? I mean, is Gen AI going to start to crowd out some of what's happening in terms of connectivity, or no? That's a big question. Yeah.
So you're really talking about the energy problem and how that fits into these technologies. So the energy problem, the energy problem is so big that I think the entire industry is underestimating how big of a problem it is. Like so let me put it this way. The energy grids simply cannot handle what the hyperscalers want to do.
Right.
It just can't.
Right.
And that addressing that gap is that's a cycle. That's years. You have to build distribution infrastructure. You have to build the power plants. You have to get the permits. You got to get the infrastructure itself. You got to get the skill sets, the electricians, and you got to get all those resources to build out this infrastructure. And we don't have enough of those resources.
Right.
And even if let's say there's unlimited money available, unlimited to throw at the energy problem, it's still not going to solve the problem.
Right.
All you're doing is driving up the cost of building out whatever they can do any
Right.
given amount of time.
Right.
I mean, the energy problem is so big that we might see the hyperscalers have a reckoning where they may have to cut half of the capacity that they're projecting to put on for AI because they just simply cannot run those data
Right.
centers.
Right.
One AI data center consumes the amount of energy of like a tier 2 city.
Right. Right.
One data center.
Right.
So said differently, one traditional data center that's running CPUs, if you have the same footprint but they're running GPUs, you're looking at 10 times the energy of that CPU based data center. The grid cannot handle this.
Right.
So everybody's making these big projections and talking about all these things, and that's great. But the reality is there is going to be a reckoning probably in the next year or two, and someone's going to say, wait a minute, none of this is really going to happen.
Yeah. And do you think so you mentioned Nokia. So do you think like the Nokias and Ericssons of the world and the CSPs of the world and everyone else that's tied into the telecom ecosystem, are they as aware of what you just said as they need to be? And are they making their strategic forecast for 5 years out, understanding that reckoning may be coming and that there may be that kind of disruption? Or no?
I think some people are aware, but nobody's publicly talking. I mean,
Right.
people are talking about it, but I think there is this pervasive underestimation of how badly set up the energy grid is. And that's for most countries. Maybe China is a slightly different case because when they built their infrastructure, they built it projecting out, 10, 20 years.
Right.
And then they pulled that demand forward and said, okay, we know we need X amount of capacity. We're projecting we need X amount of capacity, 10, 20 years out.
Right.
So we're going to build it today, right? They might be in a slightly different situation, but the Western world, these are very antiquated systems, even if we just look at distribution, not even the production side.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is these data centers require consistent power.
Right.
Those GPUs are running 24/7.
Right.
So it's not like you can run them when the sun's out. You need a constant flow of energy. I mean, this is why you see companies like Microsoft looking to restart 3 Mile Island.
Right.
This is desperation.
Right.
We see the evidence that there's desperation out there.
Right.
And the hyperscalers know of the problem, but I think they are underestimating the societal resistance that they're going to face to restarting old nuclear reactors. That is not going to go over well with society.
Yeah.
These are things that are coming down the pipe.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I'm curious to see, and I'll talk to others here at TBR about how much they think the businesses, the companies that they cover, understand that reckoning that you mentioned is coming, and understand that the hyperscalers are going to have to figure out a way to not use an entire tier 2 city worth of energy just to run a data center. So let's wrap it up. Let's turn back to 6G for a minute and wrap it up. I think you said this earlier. I'm going to put it my own way of thinking about it. 6G is technologically inevitable, but the way we're looking at it now, it's sort of financially, economically impossible. I mean, if it's going to have all the same problems that 5G has, and if it's just a layer over the capabilities and what 5G is doing, then we're looking at the same problems that 5G has with unable to get that return on the investment, which makes it economically an impossibility. But technologically, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it'll happen. It'll happen. The government's going to make sure it happens. If you think about, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but there are use cases like autonomous transportation and sensing technologies and digital twinning and some of these things that are transformational for an economy that the government will have a vested interest making sure that their respective economies can stay competitive on the world scene. So take geopolitics even out of the equation and just look at a pure competitive standpoint. There is going to be pressure to invest in these types of technologies. Quantum's in there.
Yep.
There's edge computing. There's these satellite technologies that are going up in the sky. All of these technologies are going to be part of that digital society, if you will. And the government will be under tremendous pressure to make sure that happens.
Yeah. You mentioned satellites in that piece too. And I know that a lot of the IT services companies and the consultancies that we work with as well have increasingly been investing in their capabilities around satellite, or not around the technology itself, of course, but around how it gets deployed, how enterprises can actually use satellite connectivity, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it. So I think that'll be a growth area for the IT services and companies and the consultancies as well. Be good going forward. I got one last question, because you mentioned autonomous vehicles. Everybody talks a lot about autonomous vehicles and autonomous driving. And yet at the end of the day, Porsche, I think, had its best year in a long time. Lotuses are out there still. Everybody wants to drive a car and physically drive it. So given the choice in your commute to TBR, which I know is a short commute, but still, would you rather drive yourself, or would you rather have an autonomous car get you here?
So I think there's a few different ways to think about this. Think about generational
Yeah,
behavioral changes. Like, we're used to driving, we grew up with that,
yeah.
but maybe the younger generations don't want to be bothered with it.
Hmm.
Maybe the cost of owning an automobile has skyrocketed in the last few years,
Yeah, it
especially.
has. Yeah, it has.
Not just the cost of the vehicle, but also the cost of the insurance, the repairs. Even an oil change has basically doubled in price in the
Hmm.
last few years. You are going to have an entire section of society that wants to defray that cost and maybe allocate some of that money towards something else. A car is the second most expensive purchase.
Hmm.
It's up there. Maybe
Yeah,
college, and it's
yeah,
up there with all those big things,
yeah.
healthcare and house and all that. But there's going to be society's going to look at ways to maybe mitigate some of those cost pressures. And then also you have to consider there's disabled people that maybe can't
True.
drive.
Yep.
There's going to be a market for this.
Yeah.
Two more thoughts on this.
Hmm.
Safety.
Hmm.
If you can dramatically decrease the amount of accidents on the roads by using these technologies, which is very possible, that is a big incentive for people to use
Right. Right.
those things. And the other thing is, on the private sector side, there's big pressure on transportation logistics companies to leverage autonomous transportation,
Mhm.
because just purely from a cost saving standpoint,
Right. Right.
you're talking many billions of dollars in cost savings by automating some of those things. So
Right.
there are multiple concurrent pressures, let's say, or drivers, if you will, that are pushing, I would say, society towards those autonomous driving. So we're going to live in a hybrid world for a long time.
Right.
People are still going to drive and people are not going to drive, and it'll be a mix. Some people use both, but it's definitely coming.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody that goes to San Francisco,
Oh yeah, I've seen the Waymos. Yeah.
they're all over
Yeah.
the place.
Yeah. And I suppose the road network isn't going to go away anytime soon. So trucking isn't going to go away anytime soon. So the more you can get autonomous technologies into trucking to both save lives in terms of accidents and all that, but also save a ton of money in terms of how efficiency in trucking, and then and just being able to make it a better experience for the drivers. Yeah. I can see it. I'm remain a little bit sort of skeptical, because I still like to actually physically drive my car.
Yeah, I do
but
too.
I think you're right. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we're heading that way, whether we like it or not. Chris, excellent. Thank you very much. We will chat again soon in the new year.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Next week, I'll be speaking with James Wickert about Periton, Mantech, and private equity. Don't forget to send us your key intelligence questions on business strategy, ecosystems, and management consulting through the form in the show notes below. Visit tbri.com to learn how we help tech companies large and small answer these questions with the research, data, and analysis my guests bring to this conversation every week. Once again, I'm your host, Patrick Heffernan, Principal Analyst at TBR. Thanks for joining us, and see you next week.